Well, welcome to another edition of Straight Talk here on Humpday Hangout. My name is Dan Degryse, and my co-host is retired Chief Rob Fisher. Where do we find you, Rob? And Rob's frozen. He was doing so good. All right, he might have to empty and then come back. But our special guest today is Dr. Kerry Ramella. Kerry, Doctor, Mrs. Ramella, where do we find you?
I am in sunny Phoenix, Arizona.
And what's the temp right now?
I don't know right now. Yesterday it got up to 106. Yeah, so that we're just beginning.
That sounds like a temperature, like when I had a really bad temperature. So
hospitalization time. Yeah.
We'll go back to Rob. Hopefully he's live and he's not stuck in the air. Rob Fisher, where do we find you, brother?
Danny, I'm in Costa Rica, Liberia, and I don't know what was.
Shoot, we're gonna
froze.
Yeah. All right, we're gonna let you figure that out because you're like a million miles away and your internet was doing great. But anyhow, want to try it again? All right, we're going to move forward. So Rob Fisher is on vacation right now, but he's trying to join us. He's going to join us in a little bit. But we have Dr. Kerry Ramella. I'm going to give you a little report on Dr. Ramella. And we're going to talk really about mental wellness, what we need, what we're seeing now, and what we need to do going forward based on the information that we currently have and what she foresees as the trends currently. And we're going to talk about some research that a mutual friend of ours, Dr. Susie Gulliver, has done with the Warriors Research Institute, along with the IFF. So Dr. Ramella is not only an LPC, a licensed professional counselor, but also a PhD, right? So that's why I call her doctor. Been in the field of public safety really for about 36 years. Started as a dispatcher, 911 operator. Got her licensure. Works for the Phoenix local 493, and also has created Firestrong, which probably some of the listeners have are familiar with or purchased. We could talk about that. And also is the founder and owner of Public Safety Crisis Solutions. Along with that, she's a consultant, a mom, and a wife. Trying to figure out what you're doing on your free time, Doc. I mentioned a bunch of things, but Public Safety Crisis Solution is kind of a variety of different things. EAP, in office counseling, does trainings, critical response, and consultation. Consultation from that organization, and I know you do some on your own with the IFF and other organizations. I know that you helped or were the lead on the resiliency training, the one-day training that the IFF has, and many people out there in IFF land has taken, and also assisted with the 2-day peer support training. And there's other different types of online trainings I'm sure you've been in and around with, because with the PhD, right, you're not only clinical, but you're also one of those people that love research.
Maybe.
I mean, if that's not enough, you're also married to a former firefighter, Roger, right? He worked for Phoenix for 26 years.
Yeah.
So if you talk
4.5 years of retirement, so
4.5 years, okay, great. He's got a half year on me, and I'm pretty close to. Yeah, I'm at 2019, right? Just before COVID.
Yes.
Yeah, we were.
You made the right choice.
Lucky. We were very lucky. So So yeah, Rob, you're back. I just kind of gave an introduction on Dr. Kerry Ramella. Anything else you wanted to say from where you're at now that we can see you?
Yeah, I've moved inside. I think maybe the reception outside just isn't as good, but I'm comfortable. My question then for the doctor, I know when looking at things, like you were a dispatcher too. I don't know if Danny covered that, but the transition from being a dispatcher and how we get to today, hopefully we're going to discuss a little bit of that, on how you went from that.
Yeah, it was a long transition. So actually I started like very young, a very naive young individual that became a 911 operator and a police dispatcher. And I did that while I worked on my degrees. So I did my bachelor's degree while working in that type of a job, and then promoted through that system. So when I left, I had my master's degree, and I was in management. So I was a shift manager for the communications bureau for the police department. And with PD, there just isn't a lot of movement for civilian. I could stay. I was pretty much tapped out where I was, and if I wanted to do something else from a mental health standpoint with the officers, they really were at that time looking for somebody to be sworn. They wanted you to go through the ranks, and I wasn't willing to carry a gun and work night shift in the South Side. So I jumped ship and went to the fire department. And the fire department, I did my internship with them on a crisis response unit. And so then when I graduated, they asked me to come over and run that program. So I ran a community crisis response program, worked in the fire stations with the firefighters. So really got to learn the culture, went on the calls they went on. It was a partnership with PD. So I worked with those calls too. So after doing that for many years, then, I had a lot of people coming to me for assistance, but it wasn't official. We had another EAP provider in our system at the time, but then what happened was we had a rash of suicides in our department. And so then the chief asked me to head up a mental health task force for our department to try to figure out what, if we had benefits and nobody was using them, then they were worthless. So how are we going to create resources and benefits that people would use? And that's actually how FireStrong was developed out of that task force. The members of the task force of the department helped to create that website. And then from there, it kind of grew into something that we put out there nationally for other departments to be able to become members of. So that's actually owned by the local, but they contract with me and my business to oversee the website.
I don't know if we got some background noise. I don't know if that's your fan, Rob, but either way. So that gives you, I was going to say, because you've been in the field 36 years, you had to be a certain age to be in there. So I think right now you're about 42.
Yeah, right.
You've done a lot. You've done a lot, and you got more to do. And I kind of gave you a short snippet of your bio, and not necessarily from a plug standpoint, but what are some of the other organizations that you've worked with, just to give the scope of how many people you've touched?
Well, I mean, so through FireStrong, we work with any department, and we have, I don't know, probably maybe 100 departments or so on that. So we work on that, and then we help work with them to create resource pages for their departments that are specific to their departments. Locally in Arizona, I contract with many different departments and provide services, EAP services, peer support program training, or management, of different programs that they have. So I do that for many departments in Arizona. And then I contract with the IFF, to do curriculum development, instructing, and consultations with them. And then I've gone around to some of the other areas in the nation that want to develop some of their own, very specific programs. Alabama State Fire College wanted to develop their own curriculum for the state of Alabama, so I helped them put that together. Done that with a few other departments too.
Yeah, very good. And you did I believe your thesis on resiliency.
Correct. Yeah. So I did a study on the Phoenix Fire Department on resiliency, and it was really, that for someone who didn't really love research, when I did get into that, I did find it was very interesting and it was beneficial. But my whole goal was to be able to use that to do something for the future, right? Like I didn't want to just do research for no reason. And so for me to be able to use that research to build programming that is now something that we train, internationally. I mean, for me, that was, well worth the journey, although I don't know if my husband would agree with that. It was a long process. But I did get some interesting information and some research that really hadn't been out there before. And one of those, I think, applies, pretty significantly today, in that the research that I did showed that, so basically the theory with resiliency was, people just need to be optimistic, be happy and you'll be resilient. No big deal. Easy, right? And so what I was able to show, especially with firefighters, which I think is significant, is that firefighters, tend to be negative. They tend to be pessimistic. Anyone that works in the first responder world kind of develops that outlook because you're trained to look at worst case scenarios, and you're trained to prepare for that. And you deal with a lot of, situations that just aren't, pleasant, right? Aren't real optimistic situations. So it tends to create some negativity and pessimism that I don't think you're even really realize that you're doing, So then what the research showed was that if your negativity is too high, then it doesn't matter how much positivity we try to insert. We're not going to be able to create resiliency unless we can actually decrease the negativity. So I have to decrease negativity and then put in positivity, and then you would be able to flourish, right? So how do you do that? How do we get the negativity to go down? And that's what we have to train to. We can give them all these things about what you should be grateful for, how you should, be optimistic. But if we can't train them how to be less negative, it's not going to work. So I think that's interesting. And considering today, I think the number one issue in the fire service is burnout. Burnout is negativity, right? And so if that's our number one issue, then we're not building resiliency in the fire service. So how do we get the burnout and negativity to subside so that we can then help build that resiliency in our workforce?
So I know everybody that's listening right now is like, okay, Doc, tell us. And so do you beat it out of them, or ECT, electric shock therapy, or something like that? Don't be negative, or we're gonna. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think, right, when it's very easy for us to find the negative, it's much, much harder for us to find the positive. So what we need to do is, right, accept and own the negativity, what the things that aren't going right, and then, be able to say, okay, if I try something, even if I try something, it's going to make me feel better about the situation that I'm in than just saying, oh, this sucks and I can't do anything about it. I just have to live with it, right? So we're just talking about trying to put little changes in there to be able to help, get people to be a little bit less negative in situations, and then build off of that. And if you can't get it at work, how are you overcoming it at home, right? Because if we can emphasize it at home, then maybe it would help lessen it at work. I think we have to be more proactive. The issue is that we've always been so reactive to everything. So one of my hopes, which we worked towards, with the, we met and tried to look at redoing the Wellness Fitness Initiative this year, and really talked about Fit to Thrive and resiliency in that whole concept. And one of the things the NFPA looked at was we need to really build in that more proactive response to behavioral health. So we make our firefighters do physicals every year for their physical health, but we haven't been doing anything significant for our mental health. And if we're not strong mentally, we won't be strong physically. So I think by really focusing on that and really making it be a program that could be beneficial for everyone, that everyone wants to participate in, would make a difference. So I started a program with Tempe Fire Department, which is a little bit smaller department in Arizona. And we just started it, on a volunteer perspective. We developed a system where they would do 14 online assessments that would really help us look at what are their strengths and weaknesses, look at things like performance and resiliency, but also look at things like burnout and where do they stand on, suicide and depression and anxiety and all of those other things, but quality of life as well. So we looked at all of these things, and then we would build a report out for them, showing them their strengths and weaknesses. And then, meeting with them one-on-one. We did it through telehealth to make it more convenient, and basically took more of a coaching performance strategy with it. So it wasn't like people felt like they were going through a psych exam, because nobody would want to participate in that, right? We also were able to get information from the departments that that would track significant calls they went on throughout the year. And so we would be able to say, hey, I see you went on 13 significant calls this year. How are you doing with those? Are there any that stand out? What's happening with those? So just being able to get someone in front of a mental health professional once a year to be able to just talk, we might be able to actually find some things. We might be able to catch burnout before it happens, and then lessen our chances of other significant issues like PTSD happening, because we're being more proactive.
Doc, I'm just staying with the idea that bringing mental health and an assessment into the fire service, and this question comes up a lot, I guess, and I'm just curious of your perspective. Are you seeing the fire service in general start to make that transition to being more open to it? You're in an area where I think would be a little bit more progressive than other parts of the country, and I'm curious. So, like, across North America or across the American Fire Service, is this something that you could see happening, or do you see that we have obstacles ahead of us at the leadership level, or maybe the politicians or the bureaucratic level that would prevent us from getting there?
So, there's always going to be cost is always something, right? But, I think the message here is that, if we don't invest in our most valuable asset, which is the employee, then you're not going to have a strong fire service, right? So, that's an easy sell right there, right? But the other thing would be, you don't want to, look at dollars and cents, but, if you're looking at $100 to $200 per person once a year, like, would you not invest $200 in a person to make sure that they're going to be more physically and mentally, stable to be on a truck and to provide a better service and be a happier person, right? We save more families, we save more lives, right? And we save more jobs by doing that. So I think that really has to be the underlying message. The other side of it is that it can't be just something for the membership. The management staff has to buy into this too. And it's not, hey, this is good for you guys, but we don't need it. They need to participate in it as well. So in Tempe, I started with, all the chiefs do it, and all the union executives were the first ones that we did. And then we actually took comments from them in order to market it to the membership, in order to be able to say, hey, it wasn't bad. I learned something, and, this was really good. And then they saw the benefits of it, right? And so then they wanted to move forward and encourage their membership to do it. I think the other side of that, though, too, is I was very specific in that this information had to be separate, right? This is a medical record. It's through my company. No one has access to that information. And it stays there. The only thing the department gets is a health report on how overall, what is the health of their department? What are the strengths and what are the weaknesses that would maybe help them, and that would help us develop some training that would be applicable to specifically to their department. So, I mean,
Yeah.
we have a lot of things that get thrown out there that we have to do. So we can either check the box, like, yes, we have an EAP program. Yes, we do a mental health assessment, but we're not getting any benefit out of it. Or we can invest money in it and create our own EAP, and we can create our own mental health assessment system and make it be user friendly.
So when you were first sharing, and I was sitting here, and not like I'm disinterested, but I'm writing notes, and I wrote down money and leadership, and then Rob asked that question. So same thought. If both of us are thinking the same thing, right? And you answered the question with the fact of that, yeah, every fire chief and every department is out there looking at their budget and going, how do if I earmark money towards this, then something else doesn't get it. But I think we all know our greatest asset, right, should be personnel. And we can't keep on doing the same thing, expecting a different result. We have to be, and we've learned from NFPA and NIOSH and all the people that research stuff, is that we have to train, whether it be on muscle memory, physical health, and mental health, right? I mentioned that you worked with the IFF. The IFF did and again, I know the greater majority of the people out there are non-IFF members, but they did do a study. It did cost money. It was a study back in 2015 with, I think, between some over 5,000 members. And the biggest issues out there reported by them was stress. So when we talk, and you mentioned burnout, right? What precedes burnout? Stress is just one of the many things. And the interesting thing is it's usually not a single incident. It's usually something that, in my understanding and my education and my interaction and being in the fire service for 34 years, it's been a cumulative effect over time that's happened to an individual and many other people. The other issue out there besides stress, a big thing, is relationships. And that was reported out of that study back in 2015. But the two biggest barriers that were identified in a sense of moving the needle forward, and we're talking 9 years ago, was stigma, which is associated with culture and leadership, regardless of the rank. And then just the overall internal battle that people have of what is the right thing to do. Like you had mentioned, and I don't know if it was, I'm trying to remember if it was earlier or before the show, right? The negative, you said it in the show, in the sense of negative thinking, is that if we've been told for the last 35 years that asking for help is a sign of weakness, how long does it take us to believe it's not a sign of weakness?
Well, I've been working with the IFF specifically probably since 2013, right? And we started doing our programs in Phoenix Fire in 2010. So I think that, when you do have some type of a significant event in your department, right, it's catastrophic, but it's also, a moment for us to try to, create better resources around whatever that tragic event was, right? So I think in some of those departments, you definitely see a difference in the way that the department's leadership and membership look at, accessing help because they're in that moment, right? But I think just overall in general, I've seen a huge shift. When I first started with the IFF, there was no behavioral health division within the IFF. And now we have, 3, permanent positions in the occupational health and safety division, to where we're building programs, right? And we're offering more trainings probably than any other division. So I think stigma has definitely changed. I still think that it is there. And I think sometimes the more negative a person is, the more they're worried about stigma. And then once they get help and they're not as negative, then they're not as worried about the stigma, right? So it's kind of a vicious circle, in that perspective. But I do think that if you have the right programs, if you have a peer team, if you have, some people that are, big advocates for the program on the management and the union side, you're going to have a much greater success.
Yeah, with your history with Phoenix, if I recall correctly, did you start with the department and then now work for the local, but now have a more combined approach?
Yeah, so the local always had a director of behavioral health programs that oversaw like a standard EAP program, right, that everybody has. So we had that, and then they kind of pulled me out of what I was doing and made me, kind of be starting to do member services stuff. So basically, what we were trying to do was give more options, more doors for people to go through. So then when some retirements happened and I was retiring from the city, the union hired me back. And so what I told them was because I was leaving, like I was going to go teach at ASU, right? And live a normal life, not 24/7. So they convinced me to stay, and I started the company, and I said, if you contract with my company versus me, right, then, and you let me build my own programming, my own EAP, use my own providers, then yes, I'll stay. And, we have to have a peer team, and, these are the other things that I need in order for it to be successful. So they bought into that, and we've been able to provide things. I will tell you, through the years, unfortunately, with some of the stuff that's happened economically, we have lost some groundwork, in Phoenix, and we're trying to build that back up again now. So I see ebbs and flows, in all of my departments. Sometimes it's easier for smaller departments to come up with funding to be able to do some significant things. And sometimes that's harder for a larger department because it is more expensive. It's a bigger ticket item to go to council and ask for approval for. So, but I think in the end, if you think about it, right, what is the cost of, like, if a firefighter, captain, engineer, whatever, calls in sick and you're paying overtime, if getting a mental health assessment every year prevented one less sick day for every firefighter, you would be way ahead. Right. So I try to break it down into little manageable pieces, because, I think that would be something you could probably say would be beneficial.
Doc, sticking with the stigma, and then earlier you were talking about the negative side of things, which is preventing us from being able to get the positive in. And I would think that how we deal with the negative side is kind of like our coping mechanisms. What do we have to be able to do that so that the positive can get in? Do you think in society, and maybe that, we're a reflection of society as a fire service too, but do you think in society, are we better at coping, or are we coping differently than what we did maybe back in the 70s, 60s and 70s? And that kind of ties to the stigma. If the stigma is changing, which I think it is, at least in where I was coming from in Washington State, seems like it was becoming more popular for departments to have peer support and have a MHP and all that kind of stuff. So I think the stigma is doing well, but do we have a society that doesn't really know how to cope?
Well, I think yes and no. I think in some ways they actually cope better, but it's not what we're used to. So we perceive it to be something different than coping strategies. So I know that the way, currently, all the academies do something different, but in Phoenix, we've really tried to, there's a new kind of regime in there right now that has really gone towards the more coaching and, affirmation style of getting people through the academy, right? Than being, real hardcore and, militaristic, right? So, there's an argument for either side of those things. I think where we're losing the issue is that I think we're doing really well in the academy, but we're not bridging over to management and to the crews in the field and bringing them up to speed with how we should be doing things and how we should be encouraging these guys in their first year, and how, if we want to solve our staffing issue, we need these people to stay. And the mindset of individuals these days are not to stay for, a 20 or 30-year career. So what are we going to do to they're in our investment. What are we going to do to get them to stay? And I'm not saying lessen our standards. I'm just saying we have to be more adaptive in the way we're looking at things and the benefits that we're offering people. And, because times have changed. So, but we're not bridging a gap. So we have the old way and the new way, and we're not training. We're doing great in training in the academy on the new way, but we're not training the existing on how to how to work with that.
Yeah, that's one of the troubles with first responders is that we typically have multiple generations working within the service. And so how one generation deals with another generation and how we all come into it and how we manage it. I mean, we were talking before, and I had said that I think that leadership lacks the development because leaders have been around for a while. We came into the fire service at a different time, how we dealt with things, our academy was different. And I think leaders have lacked the development to deal with these problems. And that it's easy for leadership, which maybe to our benefit, it's easy for leadership to just look and go, well, there's a program, it's just like EAP. There's a program, bam, that's a checkbox, we're done with it. When reality is anything that we're talking about here is not a checkbox. There's a lot of work involved. There's a lot of commitment involved. There's a lot of finances involved. And I just see that it's going to be hard. I mean, I don't know what the recipe is, but moving forward, how we get the multiple generations to work together, how we get leadership to be able to see the problem and invest into it is going to be a challenge for the American Fire Service.
Well, and I think, we need to have understanding from both sides, right? So as somebody who used to work in management, right? Like I can see the management side of things too, right? Like I have in Phoenix, we're looking at, some catastrophic situations of 9-minute response times. So if I am a fire chief and and I'm a union president and I've got, this is a part of the issue is, we don't have enough trucks. We don't have enough stations. We don't have enough people. So that leads to the burnout, right? So as a chief, then, and as a union president, I'm like, okay, well, this is my number one objective. I got to solve this problem, right? But how do I take care of the people at the same time? So when I'm going and asking for money, what's going to take precedence, right? So I get it. I get that, you have to ask for these trucks and these stations and this staff, but we also have to figure out how to build in a training component or a wellness component into that cost factor then, right? So that we can, maintain that so that we can take care of it from both sides. Because, as a fire chief, that's a struggle. Like how, he's got to figure out how to solve that problem, and he inherited the problem, right? So yeah. That's what we're known for is, inheriting. And so when you have a workforce that doesn't see any light at the end of the tunnel, as far as mandatory overtime or 20 calls a shift, how are we going to make them be less negative? How are we going to prevent compassion fatigue, which I think Dan had talked about? What's the precursor for burnout? It's compassion fatigue, right? So, how are we going to work on all of those things? Compassion fatigue comes from going on 20 calls a shift, right? Which then leads to burnout, which then is going to lead to more prominent issues.
Yeah, there's definitely is for you. It's easy to talk about, and I'm familiar with it. I know Rob is through his own education, through the Fools organization, through research in that is that this doesn't happen by accident. Burnout doesn't just happen by accident. There's a process and a timeline, and can be identified without giving the answer. I'm not going to give the answer. That's why we have you on this show, is if there's a fire chief, if there's a chief of training, if there's a resiliency coordinator, and we know a lot of them out there, right? But for those of them that don't have something or don't know where to turn, what would be one or two things that they can do, considering the fact that at some point dollars have to be figured into this with the budget. But what would you suggest somebody can do from their leadership position right now?
Well, I think, the big thing, right, is if everyone's fighting for money for different things, I think wellness is something they could definitely look outside of the box for. So I think that there are a lot of grant opportunities, a lot of nonprofits out there that would support wellness initiatives. And I think your insurance companies, I mean, whoever you guys are, if it's Blue Cross Blue Shield or Cigna or, Aetna or whoever your large corporation is, they have a significant amount of money that they use for wellness programs. I think our leaders need to go to their city managers or whatever your structure is, and you need to ask for that money to be allocated to first responders in a more specific way. They don't need Fitbits to track how many steps they walked. They need some different type of programming that's going to be more beneficial to them. It's sponsoring their peer teams. It's sponsoring training. It's getting them cold plunges and saunas at their stations, anything that makes them feel like they're being appreciated and that their welfare is being taken care of, and that they're willing to look at some of these little extra things that make them feel like you do care about them is going to make a huge difference. It is going to create more positivity in the way that they, think that they're being cared for in the department.
So I got to ask, because I'm sure everybody that's watching or listening, you have something at arm's length. Before I thought it was like a hamster running around in the room, but it's got to be your dog, right?
She, it never fails. She's just not doing well because I'm talking to you guys. So she is, I'm trying to keep her quiet. It's a service dog. I trained her as a service dog and as a therapy dog. So she helps in some of the group work that I do, but she's very needy today.
For a fleeting thought in the very beginning, I thought it was George coming in trying to get something from the room.
I think
something I would do.
I think the service dog senses Dan's.
Yes,
he's just got stress.
So well, and that's so funny. I'll take her to the academy, and I'm like, okay, she's trained to identify, anxiety. And so then she'll jump up on someone and give him a hug. And he's like, I swear, I'm okay. I'm okay. I'm not nervous about anything. I'm like, okay.
I'm just nervous about Rob going blank on us. So other than that, I'm good. So before I get to a serious question, so what makes you mad?
What makes me mad?
Yeah.
Oh, gosh. I try not to hold on to anger. Like, I had to learn that a long time ago, and frustration. So it's really hard for me to stay mad. But I would say, gosh, what makes me mad? I get frustrated with, mixed messages, right? So if we're, and I think the mixed messages frustrate me. If we're going to do something, let's just do it. I think sometimes too many committee meetings or too many approval processes or whatever, right? Like, that can get frustrating. But you have to, I managed a program for the fire department that was one of the most beneficial programs in the department. And I did it through grants and trying to find my own funding for over 15 years. So I have a lot of patience. and it was when I retired that they finally were able to get funding for the program, right? So now that they don't have to do that. So sometimes we create our own problems too, right? Like, if you can get it done without money, they're going to accept that, So sometimes I get frustrated, with that type of stuff. I do get frustrated sometimes when I feel like we're working harder than the person we're trying to help. I think that sometimes is something where we have to always remind ourselves. We have to meet, the member where they're at. And that can, I get peers that'll call me and they'll be like, I just, you just need to send them to a hospital. I'm like, well, I can't really do that. Like they have to want to go. And, so sometimes, and I see that in them when I see that they're getting, frustrated and burnt out because they're working harder than the member. Right. Then then we have to go back to the drawing board and train to that again to make sure that everybody understands, that some of these things are a journey and a process and aren't solved quickly and overnight. Right.
Well, I appreciate that. And for many people, I'm sure Rob's gotten that call as a leader in his department as a battalion chief. I certainly did, where somebody called and said, hey, can you just fix Rob? And I'm like, okay, tell me what's going on. And then usually it's the interaction between those two people. And then and I know we've had conversations like this and I know Rob has done this too, is you're mentoring the person that's calling you to try to manage a situation with them, because I'm not going to fix that person if the issue is between the two.
Yeah.
We have, unfortunately, another current trend in the fire service, which I'm learning about, is a gap because of these lateral transfers, because of people leaving departments and going to become chiefs in different departments, because people retiring earlier. The American Fire Service, right, Rob, has a gap of mid-level leaders. And so now you have I don't even know what you call them now, the X and Y and Z and people, and the greatest generation is gone. They're doing some instructing or some consulting, but even the baby boomers most of us are retired and gone, but there's like a 10 or 15 year gap from what I'm seeing in some departments. How do we keep leading?
Well, I think that is true, right? Like we are seeing some younger leaders, and I think that's the issue, is that they have a different, state of mind or a way of doing things or concepts, right? And so I think some of the old school ways of doing things, we have to be willing to look at, the fact that, with technology, right, that there's better ways of doing things, but sometimes that thought of transitioning is so overwhelming and task oriented that we just say it's easier just to keep doing the things the way that we were, when there really could be a more beneficial way of doing it. But we don't have the time and the energy or the personnel to put into the transition. Like I see that as sometimes the biggest hurdle to jump over. Like how do we do that, right? Like I want a new employee, I could use more staff, but then I'm like, oh my God, I don't have time to train somebody new. Well, so how do because then you have to add that into everything you're already doing. Well, you have to understand the investment in that is going to benefit you in the end, right? Yeah, it's going to be more time and work to start with, but how do we look forward for some of these things? And I think some of these younger leaders are looking for some of those things, but it's going to be a hard bridge to gap.
It seems that the younger leaders are more adapt to the technology that's out there. And Dan, what you were looking for is the Z generation, and then I think it's the Alpha generation, which they haven't identified yet. But this newer generation that's coming in, or newer generations, I'm not on I'm no longer on the bandwagon of like they're not as good as us type thing. I get it that they're different, but I think what's happening is, because of their upbringing, because of a lot of the devices that we've had, many of them lack the compassion that is needed in our profession, not just for the people that we're serving, but also the individuals within our organizations, and that leaders need to be very compassionate to their own people. And I think when you're promoting too quickly and you're getting up to those higher ranks, and this is where our gap is in our leadership, is that they've not developed into that leader that is compassionate for the body. So then it is like, technology wise, I'll give you an app all day long, but we can look at apps and that doesn't solve the problem. We have to have people that are taking care of one another at the leadership level to be able to do that. But that's just my twist on it, Danny.
Yeah, that matters. With that said, Doc, from a resiliency standpoint, and not to pit the two together, but and Rob and I know that, like, when we came on the job, these old veterans, bricklayers, guys with hands the size of baseball mitts, they thought, look at these sissies coming on the job. We get it. But what would you say in a sense of resiliency? The people coming on now, more or less resilient? And what should we do?
I think they have a different set of strengths, right? And so resiliency is so we can look at it from so many different perspectives. So I think in some ways they're more adept at change, which is a huge part of resiliency. But on the other side of that, right, like that is part of the complete issue that is creating issues generationally, like within the service itself, right? So the very thing that might be a strength for them from a resilience perspective is actually causing some complications in the culture, right, of the fire department and the bridge between, new and old in the fire department. So I think that's one way of looking at it. And I think people need to understand that, right? Like they are more.
And I don't want to throw your train of thought off, but I think about my kids, like, why don't we do it this way? And I'm like, shut your pile. This is the way we've done it. We've done it for forever. Okay, go on.
No, I mean right. Like so really, I mean, if you look at the definition of resiliency, that's a big part of it, right? Yeah. And I think the guys that are currently there, know that something has to change, and I think they're really good at identifying that something needs to change and that they don't like something the way it is, but they're not as flexible in what that change should be or how to make it happen.
Yeah, well, when you get to be 62, you're not that flexible either. So
physically, mentally, structurally, whatever, right?
Check, triple check. Yeah. I got one more question. I'm sure Rob's got a couple. So through our relationship, we know Dr. Susie Gulliver. She's out of the Warriors Research Institute. She and her team did a study called the Combust Study with the IFF. About 8,200 people took the volunteer assessment and so forth. And we don't have all the data yet. It will come out. But it covers a lot of the things that we talked about. They were looking at the effects of COVID. They were looking at burnout, and they were looking at overtime. And I don't have it exact, and I don't want to misquote Susie because she'd kill me. But a couple of key things is that she identified that it typically isn't a single incident that overcomes somebody. It's usually cumulative. And I'm going to segue before I go to the next thing, is just say, and some people have heard me say this, is my son is in one of the fire academies out here in Illinois. And he also rides an ambulance. He had an incident involving a child that was pretty significant. And as a parent, I wanted to take care of him. As a mental health professional, I'm like, I got to see who he is, and if I helped him in any way to manage himself through this incident. And, he mentioned some symptoms like not being able to sleep, poor appetite, and seeing it when he closed his eyes. It's normal, right? A lot of times people want to come in there and fix it. Next day, same symptoms. I'm like, okay, typically when I talk to people, I'm like, give the person 3 to 5 days to find their equilibrium and let them process that. It's kind of like eating a huge meal, right? You got to take a minute to process that or digest it. The third day, I talked to him, and he honestly slept through the night, ate a big meal, and closed his eyes and didn't see the incident. So he was resilient. He was able to process it, and he just needed somebody to bounce it off of. Didn't need therapy, need to go into treatment, didn't drink all night. Now the next time, right, will that be cumulative, or will that be beneficial to help him be more resilient, like self-efficacy, that he can get through that? That's kind of a statement and a question. And I know I'm talking a lot, but the last thing is when Dr. Gulliver looked through the data, there were significant things that led to mental health issues or crisis. Number one being burnout, and then a couple of other variables were lack of sleep and mandatory overtime. What's your thoughts?
So the mandatory overtime is what leads to the negativity and the burnout, right? And the lack of sleep can be because now are you not just disrupted sleep for one shift, every third day? It's 2 days every third day, right? Like, so you're getting disrupted sleep at the station all the time, right? Well, that's going to lead to disrupted sleep at home. The more you're off that routine, right? So what we also know is that part of our recovery and processing is during sleep. So now we're interrupting the ability for us to process those things normally, like a normal, how we normally process things. That happens in our sleep. So now that's disrupted, which then leads to that cumulative effect of calls, right? So we're looking more at complex PTSD. We're looking at, acute stress reactions versus, before we can diagnose PTSD. But there is some stuff out there now, like if we actually take something where somebody's, having an acute stress reaction to something, what I would say with your son is, was he able to fully process that? And he might have been. The way we would know that is that now if he goes on another call, and when that other call he's got a stress reaction to, and it also brings up the past call as well, then we know he didn't fully process it, right? So it's kind of like just like a hot wire still there in his brain. He calmed it down, but with other types of activation, it can spark that other wire, right? So one of the theories is if we do some of these new modalities that we have, like brain spotting, after a significant event, within 1 to 2 sessions, we can, calm that down, get it processed, and now it's not a live wire for the next time that you have another issue. So I think we could be more proactive in some of those cases. I think there's an argument for either. Let's see how they do with it. But also, if it was significant and they had some kind of reaction to it, let's get in there. Let's do 2 sessions of brain spotting, and then it won't be an issue for the future. And then the thing is they know they can keep doing that. So then it's a way of life. It's a way that they take care of themselves throughout their career, instead of waiting until they have that one. They are like, I don't know why this one, is affecting me. And it's because they never processed any of the other ones before. So I think that is the turning point is, can we get people to say, hey, I can go to counseling after 1 or 2 incidents. I don't have to wait for 20 years to go to counseling.
Yeah. And so when I think you mentioned counseling, some people, their immediate response is like, ew, right? It's because it hasn't
been. Peer support stuff is a part of that, right? So peer support, just talking to a peer about it, sometimes that can be a help in processing it. We just need to figure out what they're holding on to and what they're not. And I think that the great thing about brain spotting, if people don't know about it, they should look at it, is that you don't even have to talk during brain spotting, which I think is beneficial for some of our people, especially with, and we can also group it so it can be subjects, right? We can do the same thing with EMDR with a recent event protocol, but there's these modalities that we're trying to find ways to help people process things, like through a vision sight versus being through talk therapy, because some people just aren't good with that. It's not doing what we need them to do. It doesn't get to where they're holding that trauma within their body.
Doc, I don't know about brain spotting. I've never heard of that before. Can you just briefly discuss what that is like or what it is?
So basically what they do is they look for somebody who, when we experience trauma, we hold it somewhere within our body and we feel it somewhere. So by getting somebody to look at, we watch their eyes, and through watching their eyes, we can find a field of vision that looks to be where they hold their trauma. So we then have them focus on that field of vision and then focus on any of the physical symptomology that they get while they're doing that, while we ask them some questions. So they can speak if they want to, but they don't have to. So it's basically generating the thought process of things that they're holding on to and connecting it with the physical response through this field of vision, which then releases the trauma. And, people after one visit are saying, I feel reconnected to my body. I feel like I'm not holding on to that. I don't feel the angst anymore. I don't feel it in my throat or my stomach or whatever. So we're able to get that, that physiology part of it taken care of, which then clears, the trauma that we're holding within our brain too.
Gotcha. Thanks for that. I guess my last question, I know we're getting close to the end here, but my last question would be, we've talked about sleep, we've talked about building resiliency, we've talked about a lot of different things. And I'm sure the leadership that's out there that's probably watching this either live or watching it afterwards, especially firefighters, is if you could pick one thing, and like, what is it that we can do in the American Fire Service, or a firefighter or a fire department or leadership could do to improve the resiliency of their firefighters? Because if we can do one step at a time, it just helps us get to the next level, versus you've got to have a full mental health program within your organization and tied to research, and which would be great, but not every fire department can do that. So if you could do one thing, what would that be?
Well, I think the number one thing is that everyone wants to just be heard, right? So they want to feel like they've been heard. So I think, being able to really don't minimize the power that would have, right? So even if you don't have a solution, because a lot of times we'll back away, we won't ask questions or we won't listen if we know we don't have a solution to it. But I think we need to let our membership be heard. We need to hear what's going on and ask them, what it is that they think would make it better, right? And then, are there any ways that we can then contribute to that, over time, or building some type of a plan for it? But making them feel heard and appreciated is just, we can't underestimate how valuable that is overall. And that leads to communication styles for sure. And they just want to know that you're willing to, do something to make their life better, whatever that little thing is. And I think we lose that because we get so busy and things get so complicated. So I think we lose that knack for just listening to each other.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tie it back to some books that I've been reading recently. Culture Code being rereading that one again, and I think it's connectiveness. And in our society, we've struggled at having connectiveness because we have a lot of things that distract us from connecting. And the fire service in general, I mean, I think back to the firefighters of the 70s, the 60s and 70s, while it was a little bit different on how they dealt with their issues, but they seemed like they were more connective as a group than we are today. And we're now trying to find ways to reconnect. And I think with leadership, I mean, a lot of the leadership articles and books that I've read, I mean, one of the main things for leaders to do is, stop talking and start listening, and really, engage with your people and listen to what they're saying. Don't just hear what they're saying, listen to what's being said. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, it is the number one. I mean, that's the number one predictor of resiliency is connectedness. We know that, right? Like that's been proven over time. So.
Yeah, I love the question. I also love the answer. And what I was thinking immediately came to my mind was peer support. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a formal action. It'd be great if there was some formality because it gives that validity. But I know for myself, I always appreciated when, whether it be the barn boss, the officer, or the chief, came and sat down and didn't feel rushed, and besides telling a whole bunch of stories, they would listen. And I remember when I became a battalion chief and I got my own battalion and I had 5 houses I had to go to, it was the response I got all the time was, what are you doing here? Or what happened? Or it was always that negative thing. And my response was, isn't this the 1st Battalion? Don't I belong here? And it took about 6 or 8 months. And one day I didn't show up to one of the houses. And according to our SOP, we had to do 1 morning roll call with one of the companies and then 2 evening night visits. Didn't have to do a drill, just had to do a night visit. Sometimes just sign the book, whatever, depending on how busy it was. But I would stop at, honestly, all the houses. And I always said the best thing about me was my butt walking out the door, because even though that you're friends with people, you're still a ranking officer. But yeah, one time I didn't show up. The next morning I showed up at a house, and this one guy used to be a cop. He was like 6'8" and 280 pounds. He's like, "Where were you?" And I immediately knew what he meant. And I said, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "You didn't show up last day." And I said, "Why, did you miss me?" And I realized then that it became part of that culture, that they were expecting me to show up, not because they did something wrong, that broke a piece of equipment or lost a piece of equipment or yelled at somebody on the street, right? If leaders, regardless of their rank, would show up and just have a friggin' conversation, it would not only do them good, but do their team good. And that doesn't cost anything.
Right.
So you both, yeah, great answer. So any closing, well, 1, any closing comments, and 2, with your almost retirement, what is is retirement in Dr. Kerry Ramella's vocabulary?
I don't see retirement in the near future. I see I'm trying to maybe like invest in the other people. I want to get more people underneath me that I can, just maybe step back a little bit from the hands-on and allowing them to do more, and me just kind of oversee things. But yeah, I mean, obviously I love what I do. And it seems the day that I do get frustrated, inevitably I get a call or a text from somebody like, just, "Hey, thanks, you saved my life. I was just thinking about you." I had a guy text me the other day and he's like, "Hey, it's my 25th anniversary. I just wanted to thank you because I thought of you and I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for you." When you need it, you get those little messages and you remember why you do what you do, and it makes it all worthwhile.
Yeah. So with the phone buzzing, with your husband in the other room, with the dog, I know you got other things to take care of. Truly appreciate your time, your knowledge, and your openness today.
Thank you.
Doc, thank you for everything. I appreciate all that you're doing for firefighters and for public, for just public service and first responders in general. And I wish we had more people that were as connected to our profession and to do this to help us with our firefighters, with our police officers, and such. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Because you have a whole lot of free time, if people wanted to get a hold of you, how would they do that? Or do you not want
to? Email is definitely the better way.
Couldn't they go on a website and find your email?
Sure. Yeah. Our website is pscrisissolutions.com.
All right. Very good. Well, for those of you that were with us and joined us with Dr. Kerry Ramella on mental wellness, thanks for joining us. Rob, I know you have an adult beverage in the near future. Be well out there and say hi to your wife.
Will do. Take care, Danny. Thanks, doctor.
Thank you.